Do you think you've heard everything about the Madeleine McCann case? What if I told you there's a theory so controversial that no one wants to discuss it? A possibility that, if true, could turn everything we thought we knew upside down. Today we're going to dive into this ignored theory, what it reveals, what supports it, and most importantly, why it has been left aside for so long. There are secrets so deep that they cannot be revealed here on YouTube. If you want to go beyond the official narratives and uncover the darkest secrets of the century's greatest mystery, I've prepared something exclusive for you, the final dossier, the forbidden report on the McCann case. This material connects every detail the media ignored and reveals the dark truths that have remained buried for years. You can access it now in the first pinned comment, but pay attention. This content is unique and could disappear at any moment. Don't let the truth slip away again. Click the pinned comment and be among the few to discover what really happened. The story of Madeleine McCann is already known to many. The 3-year-old girl disappeared in May 2007 while sleeping in a hotel room in Praia da Luz, Portugal. Her parents, Kate and Jerry, were just a few meters away, dining with friends. Since then, the case has gained international attention, mobilizing police forces from different countries, multi-million-dollar investigations, and theories of all kinds. But what makes this case so significant isn't just the lack of answers, it's the abundance of possibilities. From kidnapping by human trafficking rings to a tragic accident, each theory raises its own questions, and to this day, none of them have reached a definitive conclusion. However, now we are faced with a new perspective, a theory that not only challenges the official narrative, but also reveals a dark, little-explored angle of the case. The question that remains is, why did no one want to look at it before? Among so many hypotheses, this one stands out for its boldness. It was initially raised by independent investigators and gained traction on social media and discussion forums about unsolved crimes. The basis of this theory is the idea that Madeleine's disappearance may not have been the work of strangers, but something much closer, more intimate. Advocates of this possibility point to a set of evidence that, according to them, was never properly investigated. Details of the behavior following the disappearance, inconsistencies in testimonies, and even the response of local authorities raised doubts about what really happened that fateful night. This theory, of course, has caused outrage, especially among those who have followed the suffering of the McCann family. But for others, it represents an opportunity to view the case from a new angle, perhaps the only one that could bring real answers. Among the countless theories surrounding Madeleine McCann's disappearance, this one is undoubtedly the most controversial. It not only challenges the official narrative, but also points to inconsistencies that many prefer to ignore. From the beginning, the case has been surrounded by shock, mystery, and an avalanche of speculations. But by analyzing every detail through the lens of this new theory, a disturbing view emerges. What if what happened that night wasn't the work of strangers? The controversial theory suggests that Madeleine McCann may not have been kidnapped by an unknown person, but that her disappearance was linked to a tragic event within her own family or social circle. This hypothesis, though shocking, is not new. Since the early days of the investigation, some clues and behaviors raised suspicions. For example, the initial reaction of Madeleine's parents, Kate and Jerry, sparked controversy. Many experts in body language and criminology pointed out that the way they reacted was, at the very least, unusual. Although human behavior in stressful situations is unpredictable, certain details caught attention, such as their insistence on claiming Madeleine had been kidnapped even before any concrete evidence emerged. Additionally, a key piece of this theory lies in the scent dog used during the investigation. The dog, trained to detect traces of human blood, reportedly signaled in the apartment where Madeleine disappeared, specifically near the wardrobe and in the trunk of the car rented by the McCanns weeks after the disappearance. For the supporters of this theory, these clues are crucial and should have been more deeply investigated. There's also the issue of the testimonies. On the night Madeleine disappeared, her parents were dining with friends at a nearby restaurant while taking turns checking on the children. The official version describes a sequence of regular visits to the room where Madeleine slept with her younger siblings. However, the times of the rounds reported by Kate, Jerry, and their friends unexplained time gaps, while others contradict previous statements. These contradictions, according to the advocates of the theory, suggest the possibility of an unexpected event that needed to be covered up. One hypothesis raised is that Madeleine might have suffered an accident in the apartment, and that panic led to a series of wrong decisions. While this idea idea seems radical, it is important to remember that similar cases have occurred in the past, where the pressure of the moment led people to try to hide a mistake only to become more deeply involved in a web of lies. Another frequently mentioned point is the initial response of the Portuguese authorities. The local police from the outset expressed distrust toward Madeleine's parents. This distrust culminated in Kate and Jerry being declared arguidos, a term used in Portugal for formal suspects. Although the accusation was later withdrawn, investigators pointed out the lack of cooperation from the couple as a significant obstacle in collecting evidence. The main reason for the rejection of this theory is obvious. It is incredibly sensitive. Pointing the finger at the parents of a missing child is an act that can be interpreted as cruel, especially considering the suffering they have endured publicly. Furthermore, the British media played a key role in presenting Kate and Jerry as victims from the beginning. Emotional reports, combined with the image of a grieving family, shaped the narrative in a way that made any suspicion toward the McCanns almost taboo. Another important factor is the media and political power involved in the case. The McCanns received support from influential figures in the UK, including then Prime Minister Gordon Brown. This support led to extraordinary resources for the investigation, but also raised questions about whether the official narrative was being shielded from more incisive criticism. Experts point out that public pressure to find a culprit quickly may have diverted the investigation from crucial clues. In many missing persons cases, initial attention focuses on the victim's closest circle, but in Madeleine McCann's case, the focus immediately turned to the abduction hypothesis. This caused other possibilities to be sidelined even before they were explored. Among the most cited pieces of evidence by those who believe in this theory are the behavior described by some neighbors and resort staff. Witnesses reported hearing screams from the apartment that night, although the exact time is uncertain. Additionally, the very location where Madeleine disappeared raised doubts. The window, pointed to as the point of entry and exit of the supposed abductor, showed no signs of forced entry, and the physical conditions would have made it nearly impossible for someone to enter and exit unnoticed. The scent dogs also remain a central piece for the advocates of this hypothesis. The signal detected in the trunk of the car rented by the McCanns sparked speculations that something could have been transported weeks after Madeleine's disappearance. Although the McCanns' defense argued that the signals could be false positives or contamination, many experts believe these clues warranted a more thorough investigation. Another point is the absence of a clear profile of the supposed kidnapper. Despite various descriptions provided by witnesses over the years, none of them led to a concrete suspect. For critics of the official narrative, this strengthens the idea that the kidnapping hypothesis may have been a diversion from the start. Whether true or not, this theory highlights something crucial about the Madeleine McCann case. The questions still outweigh the answers. More than a decade later, we still don't know what really happened that night, and every new piece of evidence or clue raises even more doubts. This theory in particular also forces us to reflect on how missing persons cases are investigated and presented to the public. Is the pressure to offer quick answers compromising the search for truth? Are we ignoring possibilities because we're afraid to face what they might imply? For many, the controversial theory is a reminder that the McCann case is far from solved, and that perhaps the answers lie in details we already have, but simply don't want to face. I remember exactly the moment I first heard this theory. It was as if someone was telling me a story I just couldn't believe, like a puzzle where the pieces seem wrong, but somehow start to fit together in a disturbing way. I thought, is this possible? Have we been looking in the wrong direction this whole time? That's how this possibility was hidden, almost like a secret no one wanted to touch. Not because it was absurd, but because it was too uncomfortable. And I wonder, how many times have we ignored something just because we didn't want to face what it could mean? As I prepare this video, the only thing I can visualize is Madeleine's face. So innocent, so full of life in every photo. And now, with this theory in mind, it's impossible not to question. Are we closer to understanding what really happened? Or by accepting this possibility, are we just opening doors to even more questions? When we finally began to dismantle the theory I mentioned, it was like opening a forgotten cabinet full of dusty files. Every page had something that didn't make sense, something that seemed to scream for attention, but for some reason, it never got the careful look it deserved. One of the first clues that raised suspicions was an inconsistency in the initial testimony of one of those close to the McCann family. This person, whose name was not widely disclosed, mentioned details that later did not match the timelines presented by the police. For example, the time when the lights in the apartment were last seen on seemed to conflict with the time the couple would have returned. And we're not talking about a small difference of minutes. This interval was significant enough to open gaps in the entire official narrative. Who was there at that moment? Why don't the times match? Another point that left me puzzled was the presence of traces that seemed to have been ignored ignored or dismissed as irrelevant. One of the items mentioned in internal investigation documents was a toy found in Madeleine's room, positioned in a way that, according to analysts, suggested haste or disorder. This strongly contrasts with what witnesses described as a scene of normalcy at the site. If the scene was truly calm, why wasn't this detail examined more closely? And then we get to one of the most polarizing theories, the possibility of involvement by someone within the family's trust circle. This idea, as you can imagine, is extremely sensitive. For many, it's almost impossible to accept that someone so close could be linked to something so devastating. However, there are experts who point to curious patterns in other disappearance cases, where the proximity of a suspect to the victim was precisely the factor that kept them out of suspicion for so long. It's here that we begin to connect this possibility with evidence that seemed forgotten. An initial report pointed to the presence of a car that didn't belong to any of the tourists or residents of the area, parked near the apartment in the hours leading up to the disappearance. The vehicle's description was vague, but it matched a model mentioned in a similar case that occurred in another region a few months earlier. Could we be facing something much bigger than we imagined? As we follow this thread of possibilities, one thing is certain. Every detail, no matter how insignificant it may seem, carries the potential to be the missing piece in this puzzle. There's something in stories like this that always takes us back to a starting point, as if the truth was always right in front of us, but wrapped in an almost invisible cloak. As I revisited the details of the case, one seemingly trivial detail began to bother me deeply. It was like finding a puzzle piece that didn't fit anywhere, and yet you knew it was too important to ignore. This detail was in a surveillance report from one of the investigators who worked on the case early on. He described a faint sound coming from the area near the apartment during the early hours of the night everything happened. A sound that seemed to be something being dragged across the floor. There were no witness reports to confirm this, and the information was discarded. But what if this sound was a crucial clue? What could have been moved there, and why did no one give it the attention it deserved? Additionally, there was the issue of the lights. Some witnesses claimed that at a certain time of the night, the apartment was completely dark. Others said the opposite, that there was still a faint light in one of the rooms. This contradiction creates a gap that seems small, but could answer much bigger questions. Who was in the apartment at that hour? And more importantly, what were they doing? One thing I can't get out of my mind is the description of the children's room by those who were there shortly after the disappearance. They mentioned that the bed seemed disheveled, but in a curious way, there were crumpled sheets and a pillow fallen on the floor, as if someone had left there in a hurry. This image by itself is enough to make your mind wander through dozens of scenarios, but it's in the emptiness of these questions that the mystery becomes even more. I began to wonder, is this case filled with small details that seem disconnected, but when put together tell a very different story from the one we've known so far? What do these seemingly insignificant signs have to tell us, and why were they ignored? What really happened that night is still shrouded in shadows, but sometimes it's in those very shadows that we find the most surprising answers. And as we dig deeper, it's impossible not to ask, what else could be hidden, waiting to be discovered? As we follow this delicate thread of clues and ignored details, something unexpected surfaced, something no one seemed ready to confront. An old record, filed as irrelevant, was revisited by an independent investigator years after the case began. He wasn't part of the official team, but he was someone obsessed with finding answers that the initial investigations had missed. And this is how one seemingly discarded piece gained surprising weight. It was a receipt dated the night of the disappearance, showing that someone made an unusual purchase at a convenience store near the location of the disappearance. The item bought wasn't relevant in itself, but the time of the transaction was. According to the data from the ATM, it occurred shortly before the estimated window for the disappearance. The most curious thing? The name linked to the card used for this purchase belonged to someone close to the victim's circle, someone who was never mentioned in public statements and seemed to have avoided any involvement in the investigation. When this data was revisited, the independent investigator managed to locate the person in question. In a brief, informal statement, the justification was strange, to say the least. The individual claimed to have been passing through the area and knew nothing about the case at the time. But what caught attention was his change in behavior when confronted with the evidence. First, he vehemently denied being in the area. Then, he tried to redirect the conversation to other possibilities about the case. This revelation paved the way for a new angle. The card data led to a deeper analysis of the movements of this person in the days leading up to the disappearance. Not only were they in the area, but there were records of a second contact, a phone call made from a public phone located just a few meters from the McCann family's apartment. This detail, which had been overlooked previously, gave rise to a theory theory that changed the course of the parallel investigation. And this is where everything began to connect. The idea that this individual could have been directly involved seemed unlikely at first, but the patterns that emerged were hard to ignore. Evasive behavior toward the police, a history of conflicts with the family, and, more disturbingly, the connection with a vehicle that was seen leaving the area at high speed that fateful night. Although this angle was never officially investigated by the authorities, it shed light on what could be a direct connection to the disappearance. The descriptions of witnesses about the vehicle matched the record of this individual, who, according to new reports, had a tense and intermittent relationship with the victim's family. This raises a disturbing question. Did this person know more than they were willing to admit? What makes this revelation even more significant is how it challenges the assumptions made so far. Everything we believe to be true about that night starts to seem incomplete, like a puzzle with pieces in the wrong places. If this line of investigation had been explored from the beginning, would the story have had a different ending? Or perhaps, to this day, there are details that are being conveniently forgotten. As we dig deeper into this new angle, it's impossible to ignore what it means for the case as a whole. We're not just dealing with unanswered questions, we're confronting the possibility that the answers were always there, just waiting to be discovered. And now, with this new information, the story we knew begins to transform into something much more complex and perhaps even more disturbing than we imagined. As we reach the end of this investigation, one thing becomes clear. The Madeleine McCann case remains an open wound, not just for her family, but for all of us who have followed this story over the years. The theory presented today, controversial, but full of implications, not only challenges what has already been said, but forces us to reevaluate everything we thought we knew. Do we really understand what happened that night? Or are there more pieces of this puzzle waiting to be discovered? Looking at the evidence and contradictions we've discussed, the question remains, why was this line of investigation left aside? Was it due to a lack of concrete proof, or perhaps something darker? The answer, unfortunately, still escapes us. Be the final conclusion. The truth, whatever it may be, deserves to be revealed. Not only for Madeleine, but for all the families living in the uncertainty of an unsolved case. Now, I want to hear from you. If you watch this far, leave the phrase in the comments, "I am the search for truth." That helps me know you made it to the end and are as committed as I am to discussing these cases deeply and respectfully. And before we go, a question for you to think about. What more could be hidden in the shadows of this case? Are there other ignored clues that may one day lead us to a resolution? If you like this video and want to see more stories like this, click the subscribe button and activate the bell so you don't miss the next videos. I'm preparing content that dives even deeper into controversial theories and the most intriguing cases. And speaking of that, don't miss the next video that will appear on your screen. In it, we'll discuss another shocking theory that's shaking up investigations into another case that marked the world. Finally, if you have any suggestions for topics you'd like to see here on the channel, share them in the comments. Your participation is what makes this space so special. Let's go together in search of the truth, one detail at a time.